Okay, in this lecture we're going to talk about how we go about finalizing this project just by just adding a couple touches here at the end, and that's going to include adding a light and a camera in our scene and just producing a nice high quality render that we can show off for this project. So the first thing that I want to do is get rid of this image plane, because again this we've already finished. We don't really need it in the scene anymore. You can get rid of it one or two ways. You can select it, okay, and by doing that it takes you right into the attribute editor. All you gotta do is go into displayed mode, and by default it's gonna be in RGB. All you gotta do is change it to none, and it's no longer gonna be displayed in any of your viewports. The other thing that you can do is go into Window, Render Editors, go into your Hypershade, and that takes a little bit to open. Alright, and here we can find all the materials that we've created for our scene. But if we go into cameras, we're going to be able to find that image that we actually used to create that image plane for the front viewport. So if you don't want it anymore in your scene, you can just select it and click delete, and it will get rid of it. So it's no longer in the scene. But if you still need it later on, you can just turn it off the way that I showed it off initially. Alright, so the next thing we should do is probably set up a camera for our final render. So we could very easily just keep moving our viewport like this, but sometimes it's a better idea just to have an idea of what it is that you're rendering. So that way you don't have to keep messing around with your perspective viewport or something like that. Or if for some reason you need to move to another location, you already lost out on that initial frame that you had that you wanted to render out. So the way you solve that is by creating a camera. So I'm going to go into Create, Cameras, and I'm just going to stick to the default camera. Alright, now this is basically an object that was created in our viewport. Alright, it's right here at 000. Right now it's pretty tiny, so just to give you a close-up of that. Let me see if I can scale it. Alright, it's just very tiny camera there. But in order to set it up, go into Panels, Perspective, and just select Camera 1. Alright. Now this is going to give us an idea of what we're actually looking through the camera here. So I'm just going to set it up at a certain point here. Okay, let's say this is what I want to render. Now, what's important about how or the position of the camera, it's basically also the size that you're going to be using to render this. So, this is going to be a small project, and basically the final render is going to be a 640 by 480. Okay. Now, there is a difference between what we're seeing in the viewport and what the final render is going to be like. So I'm just going to set up, I'm just going to render this frame just to show you that. And again, it's going to take a little bit because it has ray tracing turned on. Alright, and this is not that much different of what we would have seen if it was based on what we're seeing in the viewport. But just to be sure, now that we have a camera in our scene, having your camera selected, and again, once we're in our camera viewport, all you have to do is click on this object, and it will select the camera that you are currently on. Alright. Then we're going to go into View. We're going to make a couple changes here. I want to go into the camera settings, and I want to turn on Resolution Gate. Alright, and again, this is going to give me an exact frame of what 640 by 480 is, and basically what the render is covering. The next thing I want to do is set up some sort of bookmark that if by accident I might move my camera, let's just say that there's nothing that's locking the camera at this point, and for some reason I decide to move around and I forget to switch, I'm going to lose that initial position. So I'm going to go into View, go to Bookmarks, and then Edit Bookmark. Here, all I have to do is click on New Bookmark. Alright, and while selected, you can come here and change it. Change the name. But I'm just going to leave it at that, and then I'm going to close. So now that we've set up that bookmark, if for some reason I move around my camera view, and if I go back into my bookmark and just create that initial camera view 1 bookmark that we created, it's just going to bring it back to that initial position. Alright, so that way we don't lose that initial frame that we want to render. Alright, so now that we have that, if we look at that initial render that we made, our background is just a black solid color. That's not very interesting. It could be, it's probably taking a little bit away from what's going here, so a little bit too much. So one of the things that I can do while I'm in the camera attributes, it's change the environment of it. Now you can just you could bring in an image plane the same way we brought in the reference if you wanted to have something in the background. In this case, I just want to have something that's not as intense as the black as we have in the background, and I'm just going to choose a shade of gray, something light. Alright, so that when I render, the background's not going to be all black. And perhaps I could choose something a little darker just to kind of give it a little bit more interest. If I want to cancel my render, just press on escape. So again, I select my camera one more time. Select something along the lines of this, or a color of your choosing. And then just render. Okay. Now, one of the problems that we're facing here is that in an earlier lesson we turned on ray tracing, which is allowing for some reflection here, and we're also seeing some shadows created by the default lights in Maya, but these are not maybe the shadows or the type of light that we want. We actually want to create some lights that give this render a little bit more interest. So while having this, I'm not going to close this render view. If you do, just remember that you can always bring it back by clicking this one right here. This is called the open render view, and it's going to bring back the last render that you did. Alright, so let's create a light. And in order for that, we're going to go to create. Alright, and we have a set of lights that we can create here. I'm just going to close everything else and just keep this. Now, for the sake of this lesson, I'm just going to stick to one light, which is the pond light. Okay. Now, this is going to create a light that essentially kind of works like a light bulb, and it's kind of producing rays of light that's going at all directions. All right. And depending on what you want to do, each light's going to do something different. So currently, in this render viewport, in this preview, we're actually able to see our textures and things. But if we wanted to see a preview of what the lights are doing, I would click on 7 right above my key letters. All right, and it'll give me a preview of what this light is actually doing. All right. And again, I can just kind of switch between my camera into my perspective just to kind of give myself a better idea of what it's doing. Alright. And again, it also kind of gives me a preview while it's lighting. We can't really see the shadows, but we're going to have to do a couple kind of render testings for that. So let's look at the attributes. And, by type, the first thing that you see is that you can keep it as what originally is, which is this kind of light bulb type light that produces lights at all directions in the same intensity, or you can change it to the other types. So let's just maybe look into the other ones and see what they do. If we change into the spotlight, it creates a type of light that gives you this kind of cone shape. Alright, and you can, you know, create a type of this is mostly something that you would use for an interior light, because again, it will kind of create kind of like a cone shape kind of light for you. So something for exterior is not going to do very much for this project, but it is something that you can use. Let's see, we have the area light. Alright, and again, this is another light that we can use. The difference between this and what the point light that we used originally is that it's creating lights at 180 degrees from whatever this line is pointing. So if we're looking at it through here, it may look like it's kind of sending lights in all directions, but if that directional line that we have here is not pointing, let's say, towards the object, anything behind it is going to be pitch black. Alright, so that's the main characteristic of this light. And then we have let's see, the directional light. And this light, it's a light that will be mostly used to kind of simulate exteriors. Alright, this throws light that it's in the same direction. Alright, so anywhere where these arrows are pointing is drawing same intensity of light at all points in this direction, but it's based on the location of these arrows. So if I will move it around, it'll change the position to where the light is being sent to. Alright, but again, just for the sake of this lesson, let's just stick to the point light. Alright, simple, basic light that we can use just to kind of set up a basic render for this. Next thing I want to do is maybe change the color of my light a little bit. Alright, by default it's this bright white. You know, if it's an exterior, we might want to give it a little bit of warmth, so I can change the color to yellow a little bit. And again, notice that it's giving me a preview of what that would be like. Alright, so I want the light to have a little bit of warmth, but not this much, so I'm just gonna kind of change it so I get a little bit of yellow, but it's not that intense. Alright, so let me just select my light again, and again, we're looking at the attribute editor here. The next thing that's very, very important is this decay rate. Now, by default, all the lights in Maya are going to produce, or in this instance, this light's going to produce lights in all directions that have the same intensity. But in the real world, light doesn't work like that. Light travels, and the further it goes out, the decay rate's going to start happening. Meaning, it's not going to be as intense here as it's going to be, let's say, right here. So in order to simulate that, you have to choose a type of decay. Let's stick to linear. And again, linear, it's a simulation that's not exactly as it works in the real world, but it's something that we can use just to kind of begin with. One of the things that happens once you apply any sort of decay into your lights is that you're going to notice that the initial intensity of your light is going to be strong enough. So by having no decay and our lights going at all directions at the same intensity, it's going to light everything up. But at the moment that we add decay, it's not going to be strong enough to light up anything. So the intensity of our light, it's going to have to increase massively in order to affect what's happening in this scene. So and again, just so you can see the difference, if I were to increase this by a power of 2, 3, or even 10, it would oversaturate our scene. The difference is, once you apply something that's decay, even if you bring up to 10, it's not going to affect our scene at all. So the intensity that we need to bring into the light to affect the scene is going to be very massive. So 100 is not enough. 1,000 seems to be bright enough, or maybe it's a little bit too much. So let's stick to something like 900. Alright. and I can just move this light around just so I know what it is doing exactly. I want to go back into my camera perspective here, and again, I want to find out if this is too bright or just bright as I need. Now, as covered before in an earlier lesson, you're gonna need to start making comparison between what we're seeing here, and just so you know if the adjustments that we're making to the light are making any difference. So this was the initial render that we did without lights in our scene. And if you want to keep that image so you can make comparison, you will click on this symbol, which it will keep this image for you to be able to go back to. Alright, and then I'm just going to produce a new render here. Alright, so one of the things that we're seeing now that we have lights in our scene, and again, notice that the initial default light that comes with Maya, it's very flat. So just adding a light and giving a little bit of warmth and adding a little bit of decay gives our render a little bit more personality. Okay. One of the things that we're seeing is that maybe some of the bump map that we have in our scene is not powerful enough to come through. So for instance, we're supposed to have a little bit of texture on this and maybe the floor, so we need to kind of bring that out a little bit, and this is where these tests kind of come into play, just to make sure that what's being rendered is actually looking the way it's supposed to. So if I click on this image and I go into my Lambert material, which is this floor, okay, and I'm gonna go into my bump mapping, and I want to change the bump depth so it gives me a little bit more bump, just kind of what we're seeing here on the wall, because right now this is very flat. So I brought this up to 0.75. Now I'm gonna make a region render, because I don't want to take the time to render the whole image. Again, any change that I'm making to this bump map is not going to affect anything here, but just here. So I can just kind of select marquee an area here, alright, and then click on the render region, and it's just going to show me what's going to be happening here. Okay, and again, we can see a little bit of bumpness on the floor, so that's looking a little bit better. Okay, now we want to add a little bit of bumpiness to what's going on here, again to add more interest to a render. So I'm going to select that. Alright, and let's increase that to 0.5. Do another region render. Alright, and we can see that there's a little bit of bumpiness in our wall right here. And again, it's just kind of adding a little bit more interest to a render. It's making it look more appealing. And that's kind of what we're going for. So one more test. Okay, and again, if I wanted to maybe add a little bit more bumpiness to the wood here, I could. But I think this is gonna work pretty well. So let's go back to our light. I could go back into my, again, I can't select it here because I can't find it. I could go into my perspective viewport and find it there, or I could go into my outliner and find it on my list of objects. So I can just select it here and I'll be back. I'm back to my attributes for this light. So we added a little bit of decay. Now let's jump into shadows. Alright, there are two types of shadows that you can use with lights in Maya. One of them, the basic one, is the depth map, and this is a shadow that's being produced and it's image based. Okay, now the other type is mental ray. Alright, and these ray trace shadows only work work well with an engine called ray trace, but we're not going to be using that for this project. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm using my depth map shadows for this. So I'm going to click on this, and like I said, these are based or image based. So what it's actually doing is projecting an image onto our geometry, which is where the resolution comes in. If our resolution is too low, again by default is 512. If we go, I don't know, let's say half of this, 256, and we do a preview here, and again I'm just gonna do this area, you can notice that the quality of our shadows have gone down drastically. And again, it's because there is not enough resolution on this image-based shadow that is creating here. It's all pixelated because it's only at 256 pixels. A 512 gets a little better, and again, if I want to make a contrast, I'll just keep that image, make another region render. Alright, so this is our original shadows, and now that we added more resolution, it's going to be more crisp. So the more resolution you have, the nicer your shadows are going to look. So we want to increase this to something like 1024 or even more, but again, something like this for a basic project like this should be just fine. So let me just do another region render. Okay. One of the other things that you notice is that our shadows are very dark. All right, and by default, the color of our shadow, it's black. We can actually tone this down a little bit, again, and make it more appealing if we just kind of change the color to something of a lighter gray. Okay, and again, let me just keep this image, do another preview render here. You'll notice that our shadows are not as intense anymore. Alright, so that looks a little bit nicer. If I want to get rid of any of these previews that I'm creating, I can just go back to this one and just click on the button right next to keep image and just remove that image. Alright, so if you just want to keep contrasting with the ones that we're working on here, you don't need to keep the other ones. Now, the filter size has to do with how blurry your shadow is, and you know, if you're trying to simulate something that's in the middle of the day of summer, you're gonna find really crisp shadows. But you know, depending on the type of result that you're trying to find here, maybe something this sharp is not what you're looking for. So you can come to the filter size and just add a little blur just by increasing the filter. Alright, so it was a default of 1. I'm going to change this to 5. Do another region render here. So I'm going to keep this image. Okay, and again, notice that our shadows now have a little bit of blurring. And again, just kind of makes it a little bit more interesting. And just to kind of see the comparison, this was before, this is now. And again, might be a little bit too much. Let's just leave it at 3. Okay, and the bias basically offsets the movement of your shadow, but you know, if you want your shadows to be kind of projected realistically, you usually don't mess with this. These attributes we're not going to cover, so let's just stick to what's going on here. Let's do a full render of what we got going on, see how well our lights are working. Okay, and again, at this point, we can determine whether or not we like what we're seeing of our shadows. If we like how they're being projected, again, we're not seeing a lot of things kind of falling here, and it's because our main light is actually being projected from above down, so it's just producing a couple shadows. We've seen a nice bump map to our textures, again, making it really appealing. If we wanted to, we could go in here and add a couple more lights, just to kind of bring a little bit of brightness into this. So let me just change to my perspective viewport here. I can create another light. This is just going to be another point. Now the idea of this one is mostly just to kind of fill in some of the dark spots that we got going on here. It doesn't have to be that intense. Alright, it could even be not necessarily a point light, but we could do a nice directional light that's just kind of filling in our lights or the dark areas in this direction. Just keep it pretty soft. Alright, and since we don't want the shadows that we created with this light to conflict with what's going on here, we don't even have to turn on shadows for this. So again, I just want to make sure that I check it off on this light. I'm sorry, that's the wrong light. Okay. And on this one, I don't need to keep it on because I'm just trying to make this image a little bit brighter. So I'm gonna go into my hotbox. Actually, let's just go into my panels and find my camera here. And let's just see what that light is doing, the one we just recently created. This is what we had so far. I'm gonna keep this image. Let's make another render. And again, keep in mind that any changes that you do to the settings, so the more light that you have in your scene, the more computing power your scene's gonna need to render. So again, the difference of just adding extra light just kind of makes your scene a little bit brighter, a little bit nicer, gives it a little bit more appeal. And at this point we could be complete with this. We can always go back and add more details to the house, bring a little bit more interest by playing with our shadows and kind of playing around with how you want them to cast on the object. But this is the conclusion to this video. And again, this was an introduction on how to set up a camera for your scene, and then how you go about just creating a light so you can kind of bring a little bit more interest into your scene by creating shadows. And we looked into the different attributes of the shadows that they, for the most part, they similarly share. And that concludes this lesson.